for giving me this platform to share with you or to try and answer a question that I have projected on this screen that asks, what do flaws have to do with insects? Now, the flaws in our homes are as diverse as the audience we have here. These flaws are largely built dependent on social economic factors and possibly our preferences. We rarely think about the impact that flaws may have on our health unless they have something that irritates us, and then we immediately react to that. But beyond the scope of our vision, there are organisms that live on our floors that can make us sick. And I'll give you a few examples. Soil-transmitted helminths or worms, bacteria, and viruses. These occur especially on unsealed floors or earthen floors, and this, when ingested, can infect our guts and lead to diarrheal diseases. But I'm sure all of you are aware of that, so this is not new news. But what you might not be too familiar about are organisms that live on our floors that can cause the most neglected parasitic skin disease, affecting millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa and South America, and that to date, this skin disease was only recently included in the list of neglected tropical diseases by WHO. I'm referring to a disease known as tungiasis that most of you might know as jiggers. So tungiasis, or jiggers, is caused by the world's smallest sand flea known as Tunga penetrans, a very beautiful flea. And this disease normally occurs when the adult female burrows into our skin head first and lives there for the rest of her life. She feeds on our blood. She even mates while inside our skin. And once she's fertilized, she develops hundreds of eggs that are shed on the ground. And there they hatch into larvae that develops into pupae, and eventually they develop into adults. So now remember our female flea that is still in our skin? Okay, so she lives there for another maybe 4 weeks or so, and then eventually she starts to shrink, and then she dies. But once she dies, she leaves behind a groove or a hole that becomes infected and becomes a wound. And those wounds caused by this female flea are the ones that cause the disease that we call tungiasis, due to the disfigurement they leave behind. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. This disease is one of the most anguishing diseases. It causes severe pain, discomfort, and a lot of itchiness. I think there are many of us who are familiar with this. And it worsens at night, and I've just described the physical aspects of this disease. The mental aspects of this disease are unimaginable, because most people who suffer from this disease, they experience intense shame, and they're mostly, shunned by their communities. And it does not help the fact that this disease is associated with the poorest of the poor. Now, growing up, I experienced this disease. The disease is not uncommon to many of us, and neither was it uncommon to me. So growing up in the area where I come from, I used to go visiting my grandparents in the village. And every time I would go to the village, it was guaranteed that I would get infected with jiggers. Then when I was back home, my awkward walking styles and my constant discomfort and itching of my feet would lead my mother to call me to sit on her laps and to proceed to remove the female flea embedded in my legs using a very painful procedure featuring a needle. Now, this is not news to most of you. You have all experienced this. So I feel like we are one of the most lucky ones, because we did not experience the worst that this disease offers. The people I have encountered so far have tens or hundreds or even thousands of fleas embedded in their skin. And that is not the worst of the news I'm about to share. Unfortunately, this disease has no simple or safe treatment that is registered or recommended for the affected communities. And so that's where we come in, because the only way to fight this disease is to go to where the flea is found, or where the flea spends more than half of its life cycle. Now, for years, it has been known that the sand flea is found on the ground. I think most of you are aware. But what was not known were where the hotspots were and why certain areas seemed to have the sand flea more than others. So we here at ISIPE for the last decade have been working hard to fill in these information gaps. We have been studying trying to understand the insect ecology of the sand flea, to try and understand where is the insect when it's not inside the human, and what is favoring its multiplication, among very many other questions that we have been asking as scientists. And so far we've been able to establish that you are more likely to be infected with tungiasis inside your house than outside, especially if your house is made of floors that are unsealed or earthen floors. And once you're inside the house, the stages that occur outside the human being, that we call off-host stages, are more likely to be found in the sleeping areas than any other area of the house. So this has answered part of our question. If we want to target the sand flea, then we must go to the floors that are inside the house and specifically to the areas where we sleep. So together with partners, disease experts from the London School and Cambridge, as well as engineers from the Jomo Kenyatta University, we went ahead and explored different flooring options that could be adopted by rural communities in different parts of Kenya, because rural communities are more affected by this disease. And we came up with one of a cement-based floor that seemed to have or to show some promise. And what we did, we set up the largest field trial that has been done. Actually, there has not been a field trial looking at the impact of a floor on a disease that has been done before we did this trial. So what we did, we selected 2 areas in Kenya, one in the western part of Kenya and another one in the coastal part of Kenya that are both high, they both have a very high prevalence of tungiasis. Then once we went to these areas, we selected homes that have these earthen floors, and then randomly selected half of those homes to receive this new floor, and the other half was studied as a control. Then we followed up on all the homes to look at how, what the population of the sand flea would be with the new floors and the incidence of the disease. So what we were able to see is that the off-host stages, or the stages outside the human, were significantly reduced once we applied the new floor, and the incidence of tungiasis by the residents or among the residents in these homes that received the new floors was also significantly reduced. So additionally, we noticed that most of the children in these homes that received the new floors had a significant reduction in diarrheal diseases. So these are good news for everyone, right? Well, the communities were really happy with the benefits of having a new improved floor in their homes, and most were willing to adapt this floor into their homes, which is good news for them. But for us as the investigators, we looked behind at the homes we had just worked on, and we were leaving behind, and we had very many concerns. We noticed that most of these rural homes that we had worked on had holes gaping in the walls that could easily allow entry of mosquitoes, which can transmit malaria indoors, and that there were so many grooves on the wall that could be ideal breeding areas for insects like bedbugs, which is a public health menace worldwide. And we wondered, isn't there something we can work with together with the community to develop ideas that could benefit them? For example, could we come up with prototypes of improved walls of the rural home where we attempt to smoothen without using any extra material, but this smoothening could significantly impact on the entry of mosquitoes and even the breeding of other insects? And while we are thinking about modifications, could we expand our modifications outside our entomological safe zone and maybe even improve on the ventilation of the rural kitchen that most of you know it normally has very high smoke generation that leads to high incidence of respiratory diseases? Could we, while we are in the kitchen, could we improve on the traditional cooking stove and reduce the impact of smoke generation? And so we have now developed a concept known as the healthy home concept that proposes simple, affordable improvements of the rural home using locally available materials so that there isn't any extra burden on the habitats. And the purpose of this concept is to reduce significantly the incidence of diseases inside the home. And while it's still a concept, we are very hopeful that this new phase of research will be able to generate the scientific evidence we need to show that these modifications do in fact have an impact on disease incidence inside our homes. And so I'd like to invite you to join us in bidding farewell to jiggers, to worms, to mosquitoes, to bedbugs and other insects from our home by building from the floor up a healthy home for a healthy population. Thank you very much.